Evelyn Harper woke before the alarm, the way she always did. At 72, her body no longer needed to be told when morning came. She moved slowly, careful with her knees, and slipped her feet into the worn slippers by the bed. The house was quiet. Too quiet, she thought, but she did not stop to ask why. She buttoned her cardigan, smoothing the fabric, down over her stomach, and walked toward the kitchen. The hallway clock ticked with a steady, patient sound. On the kitchen table, next to her favorite mug, lay a single white envelope. She paused. It was not a bill, not junk mail. Her name sat in the center in a familiar, uneven hand. Evelyn. Her heartbeat picked up, a soft pounding in her ears. She looked toward the doorway. The bedroom was out of sight. The garage door was closed. The house remained still. She reached for the envelope, feeling the faint tremble in her fingers. The paper was thick, not the kind they used for everyday things. Someone had chosen it on purpose. "Tom?" she called, her voice smaller than she meant it to be. No answer came. Only the clock ticking and the faint hum of the refrigerator. She opened the envelope with care, as if it might tear too easily. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, folded in half. The handwriting was Thomas's, but more cramped than usual, as if every word had been pushed out against some inner resistance. She read the first sentence and felt her breath catch. "Evelyn, by the time you read this, I'll be gone." Her eyes moved down the page, line by line. He wrote that he was leaving, that after years of feeling unseen and stuck, he needed a new start. He wrote that he did not want to fight, did not want tears, did not want to waste the time we have left in anger. He said he had found a place to stay. He asked her not to come after him. "I can't do this anymore," one line read. "I need to feel alive again before it's too late." Evelyn's hands began to shake harder. The black letters blurred. She blinked, once, twice, until they cleared. She read the letter again from the top, hoping she had misunderstood. "This must be some kind of joke," she whispered, though she knew Thomas would never joke like this. The words on the page did not change. 50 years of shared mornings, holidays, hospital visits, small fights, larger silences, all of it seemed to collapse into a single, thin sheet of paper on a kitchen table. Her legs felt weak. She pulled out the nearest chair and sat down, the wood creaking under her slight weight. She laid the letter flat on the table and smoothed the creases with her palm, as if order on the page might bring order to her thoughts. Her first instinct was to stand up, grab the phone, and call him. Demand an explanation. Ask when he had become so unhappy that he would walk out without a word. Ask how he could talk about our time left, and then choose to spend it away from her. But the phone stayed on the counter, untouched. Instead, she stared at the final lines of the letter. Thomas thanked her for all the years, for raising the children, for standing by him through his heart surgery. He said he hoped she would find peace and maybe even freedom without him. Freedom, she murmured, the word dry on her tongue. She looked up, scanning the room as if expecting to see signs of his leaving. His coffee mug was not in the sink. His jacket was gone from the hook by the back door. The small chipped bowl where he kept his car keys was empty. He had planned this, not in a rush of anger, but in quiet, deliberate steps. Evelyn folded the letter along the original crease and then folded it again. Smaller, as if she could make the message itself smaller. She held it in both hands, pressing the paper between her fingers until her knuckles whitened. "I'm still here," she said softly, though no one was listening. "I'm still here." The clock ticked on. The morning light eased through the thin curtains, painting pale rectangles on the floor. Outside, a car passed, then another, ordinary sounds of an ordinary day. Inside the kitchen, everything had changed, and nothing had moved at all. For a long moment, Evelyn did not move. The letter lay folded on the table in front of her. A small, silent thing with too much power. Her eyes stayed on it, but her thoughts drifted, scattered and sharp. Finally, she pushed her chair back and stood. Her knees complained, but she barely noticed. She picked up the letter and slipped it into the pocket of her cardigan, as if she could not bear to see it yet could not let it out of her sight. The hallway felt narrower than usual as she walked through it. Family photos lined the wall, school pictures, a wedding portrait, a faded snapshot of Thomas holding their first grandchild. In the wedding photo, he was young and straight-backed, his hand firm on her waist. She remembered how his fingers had trembled when he slid the ring onto her hand. Now he had left with a piece of paper. She paused in front of the wedding photo. Her own younger face smiled back at her, bright and sure. "Did you know?" she whispered to that girl. "Did you ever think this is how it would end?" The girl in the frame kept smiling. Trapped in a day that was all promise and no doubt, Evelyn moved on. In the living room, the armchair, where Thomas always sat, felt like a presence and an absence at the same time. The cushion still held a slight dent. The remote lay on the side table, lined up with the edge, just the way he liked it. She reached out and touched the armrest with the tips of her fingers, then pulled her hand back quickly, as if it burned. The TV screen reflected her face, pale, lined, eyes wide and tired. Behind her, the room looked tidy and safe, the way she had kept it for years. Nothing in that reflection showed a woman whose husband had just walked out. Her throat tightened. She turned away. The hallway to the bedrooms felt longer. She passed the door to their children's old rooms. One was now a guest room. The other had become a kind of storage space, packed neatly with boxes labeled in her careful handwriting. She opened the door to the guest room and stood in the doorway. The bedspread was smooth, the pillows fluffed. On the dresser sat a small framed picture of their grandson, holding a toy truck, his eyes shining. She remembered the night he was born. Thomas had held her hand so tightly in the hospital waiting room that her fingers had turned white. When the nurse came out with the news, he had laughed and cried at the same time. Later, when they were alone, he had kissed her forehead and said, "We did good, Evie. We really did." That same man now needed to feel alive again without her. Her chest ached, a dull, heavy pain. She closed the guest room door gently, as if someone were sleeping inside. At the end of the hall was the master bedroom. Their bedroom. She stepped inside and looked around slowly. The bed was made on her side. His side was a little less neat, the blanket slightly wrinkled, where he had last slept. His pillow still carried the faint shape of his head. The lamp on his nightstand was off, but the book he had been reading lay open, face down, as if he meant to come back to it. On top of the dresser, his watch was gone. His favorite navy sweater was missing from the chair where he usually tossed it. The top drawer, where he kept his wallet and keys, was half. The phone rang just after noon. Evelyn almost didn't answer. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, and the weight of the morning still pressed against her ribs, but she reached for the phone anyway, forcing her fingers to uncurl. "Mom? Are you okay?" Sarah's voice came through, thin and sharp with worry. "You sounded strange in your message." Evelyn closed her eyes. She had forgotten the message she left, her voice barely above a whisper, asking Sarah to come by when she could. "I'm fine," she said softly, though the words were fragile. "Just come over." Within 40 minutes, both her children were standing in the living room. Sarah still had her work badge clipped to her blouse, and Michael smelled faintly of the garage from his job at the auto shop. They took one look at their mother's pale face, and the questions began. "What happened? Did you fall? Did you get bad news from the doctor?" Evelyn shook her head and reached for the letter on the coffee table. She held it out with two hands, the way someone might hold a delicate object or a confession. "Your father left," she said quietly. The room fell into a thick, stunned silence. Sarah was the first to react. She snatched the letter from Evelyn's hands and read it in a single, fast sweep. Her eyebrows lifted, then tightened, her mouth dropping open in disbelief. "He wrote you a letter?" she said, her voice shaking. "A letter? After 50 years?" Michael stepped closer, leaning over Sarah's shoulder to read for himself. His jaw tightened. The muscles in his neck tensed. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. "He just leaves? Doesn't even talk to you?" "What kind of?" "Michael," Evelyn said, her voice gentle but firm. He stopped talking but didn't stop shaking his head. He paced the rug in short, angry steps, one hand gripping his hip, the other clenched at his side. "This is insane," he said. "He's lost it. I'm calling him." He reached for his phone, but Evelyn raised her hand. "No," she said. "Please don't." "Mom, he can't just disappear like this," Sarah said. "He can't just walk out and expect everyone to accept it." "He asked us not to come after him," Evelyn said. The words felt strange in her mouth, part acceptance, part disbelief. "And I don't want to fight." "But he started the fight," Michael snapped. Sarah put the letter down on the table and turned to her mother, her eyes soft but burning with emotion. "Mom, how long has he been feeling this way?" "Did you know?" Evelyn swallowed. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I didn't. Maybe I should have. Maybe I didn't see what I should have seen." Sarah moved to sit beside her and took her mother's hand. It was warm, firm, the way Sarah's hand had been when she was little and afraid of storms. "You didn't do anything wrong." Evelyn waited until the house was quiet again. Her children had insisted on staying longer, offering to make tea, to cook dinner, to sit with her until evening. She kissed them both on the cheek, and told them she would call if she needed anything. She promised twice to keep her phone nearby. But when the door closed behind them, she stood for a long time in the stillness of the living room, listening to the silence settle. It was a heavy quiet, but not frightening, more like the quiet before a decision. She walked down the hall to the small study she once used as a sewing room. The desk was old, scratched on the edges, but sturdy. Above it hung a faded watercolor painting of a seashore, a gift from Thomas on their 15th anniversary. She looked at it for a moment, remembering how proud he had been to surprise her with something she had admired in a shop window. Then she sat down. The chair creaked. The desk lamp cast a soft, yellow halo across the surface. Evelyn reached into the top drawer and took out her favorite stationery, a pale cream set with simple gold trim. She smoothed the first sheet with the side of her hand, letting the paper warm under her touch. Her mind felt strangely clear. She picked up her pen. For a moment, nothing came. The tip hovered above the page. Her breath was slow and steady. She was not trying to find the perfect words, only true ones. Then, gently, she began. Thomas. She paused. Even writing his name felt different now, both familiar and distant. The narration inside her mind unfolded while her hand moved across the page. She wrote about the morning she found his letter. She didn't describe her shock or the way her hands had shaken. She simply acknowledged the moment he chose to leave. She wrote that she understood he felt trapped, that aging frightened him, that the slow quieting of their days had made him restless. She did not excuse him, but she didn't condemn him either. She wrote, "You say you felt unseen. I believe you. But I wish you had told me while you were still here, while we were still facing life side by side." She continued, "We spent 50 years building something together. Not perfect, not always peaceful, but real. I won't pretend your leaving didn't cut deep. It did. But pain is not the whole story." Her pen moved steadily. She didn't rush. She wrote about their children, how they had grown into strong, imperfect, caring adults. She reminded him of the nights they had stayed up when Sarah had the flu, or the time Michael broke his arm at school, and Thomas had carried him to the car. "Family was never a burden to you," she wrote. "Please don't rewrite your life to make escape look noble." She took a slow breath. The next words came with more certainty. "I am not falling apart, Thomas. Perhaps you believed I would. Perhaps that made your leaving feel easier. But I am still standing. I am still myself." Her pen paused again. She looked down at the sentences, at the loops and lines of her handwriting. Thomas Harper sat alone in the cabin's narrow kitchen, the kind of place built for fishing trips and hunting seasons. It smelled faintly of pine and old coffee. Outside, the evening light hung low over the trees, painting long, thin shadows across the wooden floor. He had chosen this place because it felt far away from everything, especially from her. He had expected guilt, yes. He had expected discomfort, maybe even tears. But he had also expected a quiet kind of relief, the kind that comes when a man finally breaks free from the weight he has been carrying for years. That relief had not come. The envelope lay on the table in front of him. His name, Thomas, was written in Evelyn's careful hand, the way she used to label homemade jams or Christmas cards. He had stared at it for nearly an hour before opening it. Now, her letter lay unfolded beside the cold cup of coffee he had poured but never drank. He rubbed his forehead, eyes tracing her handwriting again, slow and unsteady. She had not begged. She had not pleaded. She had not tried to guilt him. She had answered him with dignity, something he had not given her. Her words echoed in his mind. "If you believed I needed you to survive, you never truly saw me." He pushed the chair back slightly, the legs scraping against the floor. His chest tightened. The line struck deeper than anything he had read all day. Evelyn had always been quiet, gentle, steady. He had mistaken that steadiness for dependence. He had convinced himself she wouldn't know how to stand alone. He had been wrong. A voice broke the silence behind him. "You all right there, Tom?" It was Frank, the friend who owned the cabin, a widower who lived half the year in Florida and didn't ask too many questions. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely, eyes soft with concern. "No," Thomas muttered. "Not really." Frank nodded once. "That from Evelyn?" Thomas tapped the letter with 2 fingers. "Yes." Frank stepped closer, pulling out the chair across from him. "Mind if I sit?" Thomas shook his head. For a moment, neither man spoke. The air felt heavy with the smell of wood smoke drifting in from the fireplace. Finally, Frank cleared his throat. "You expected her to scream at you, huh?" "Something like that," Thomas said quietly. Frank gave a small, sad smile. "She didn't, did she?" "No," Thomas said. "She didn't." He looked down at the letter again, at the soft curves of her handwriting. He tried to imagine her sitting at that little desk, writing this. Her hand steady. Night fell slowly over the cabin, the kind of slow darkness that seemed to seep into the walls. Thomas sat at the small wooden table long after the sun had disappeared. The lamp cast a dim circle of light around him, leaving the edges of the room in shadow. Evelyn's letter lay open in front of him, its creases softening from the number of times he had unfolded it. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows. Inside, silence wrapped around him like a thick blanket, not comforting, but heavy. He had thought solitude would bring him peace. He had imagined long walks in the woods, quiet mornings with coffee, evenings spent rediscovering old hobbies. He had told himself that leaving would lift the weight of age from his shoulders. But now, each hour stretched thin, empty, and echoing. He picked up the letter again and read one line over and over. "I am not falling apart, Thomas." Her voice filled his mind, steady, calm, almost gentle. She wasn't angry. She wasn't begging. She wasn't lost. He was. Thomas closed his eyes and pressed the heels of his palms into them, feeling a pulse of guilt throb behind his forehead. "Why did I think this would help?" he muttered to the empty room. He stood and walked to the small window over the sink. The forest outside was thick with night. The moon barely broke through the clouds. He leaned his forehead against the cool glass. He remembered the morning he had left. Evelyn had been asleep, her breathing soft, her hand resting on the blanket near his. He had watched her for a long time. He had almost woken her, almost spoke the truth that had been eating at him for years: the fear of becoming invisible, the shame of feeling like a burden, the terror of growing old in a body that no longer obeyed him. Instead, he wrote a letter. He whispered, "Now, coward." He turned away from the window and wandered toward the living room. The cabin felt even smaller tonight, like the walls had shifted closer. He sat on the couch, his back sinking into the old cushions. His hands rested on his knees, palms open, as if waiting for something to fill them. But nothing did. The clock on the wall ticked with slow, deliberate clicks. Each one scraped at his thoughts, marking the time he had wasted and the time he had run from. He thought of Evelyn in their home. He imagined her moving through the rooms, pausing in the doorway, touching the furniture, sitting on the sofa with her hands folded. He pictured her standing at the kitchen counter, reading his letter. The image made his stomach clench. In his mind, he heard her voice again. "I have a voice." He had forgotten that. Or maybe he never understood it in the first place. As the minutes passed, a new thought crept up on him, slow but sharp. She wasn't simply surviving without him. She was choosing her life without collapsing. The realization cut deeply, not because she had hurt him, but because she had shown him the truth he had been hiding from. He wasn't afraid of Evelyn. He was afraid of himself. Afraid of being irrelevant. Afraid of disappearing into routine. Afraid that age had taken more from him than he was willing to admit. He ran because he believed he was fading, and he thought leaving would make him feel alive again. He picked up the letter a third time, reading the last lines aloud in a whisper. Morning came slowly, with a pale, weak light drifting across the cabin floor. Thomas sat on the edge of the narrow bed, fully dressed though he hadn't slept. His shoes were tied too tightly, his shirt button wrong at the collar. He didn't notice. He held Evelyn's letter in his hands. The paper was softer now, worn from rereading. Her voice, steady, measured, painfully honest, echoed through his thoughts, until he could no longer separate the words on the page from the quiet truth inside him. He stood up suddenly, as if pushed by something he could no longer argue with. The decision wasn't planned. It wasn't brave. It simply rose inside him, heavy and unavoidable. He grabbed his coat, locked the cabin door behind him, and walked to the car. The drive back to town was long and winding. Trees blurred past on either side. The radio stayed off. His thoughts moved in circles: regret, fear, shame, something like hope. Then back to fear again. At one point he whispered, "She won't want to see me." But the car kept moving forward. By the time he reached the familiar streets of their neighborhood, his hands were cold on the steering wheel. He parked a few houses away and sat there, staring at the quiet row of homes. Everything looked the same, but he felt different, smaller, older, stripped down to something he didn't yet understand. He took a slow breath, opened the car door, and stepped out. Each step toward the house felt heavier than the last. The walkway was lined with Evelyn's rose bushes, trimmed neatly, the way she always kept them. He had teased her for years about talking to them as she watered them. Now he wondered if she had confided in them after he left. He reached the gate. His hand trembled as he lifted the latch. Evelyn was in the garden. She knelt beside a cluster of pale pink roses, wearing her wide sun hat and an old sweater with the sleeves pushed to her elbows. She held pruning shears in one hand, gently trimming a wilted bloom. She looked peaceful, steady, whole. For a moment, Thomas simply watched her, unable to move, unable to breathe. She looked smaller than he remembered, but somehow stronger. He cleared his throat softly. "Evie?" She froze, not startled, not afraid, just still. After a moment, she turned her head and looked over her shoulder. Her eyes widened, only slightly, before they softened into something he couldn't read. Not anger, not relief, something quieter. She stood slowly, brushing soil from her gloves. Her voice, when she spoke, was even. "Thomas." He swallowed. His mouth felt dry. "I didn't want to come like this," he said, without calling. You came," she said. "That's enough for now." Her calmness shook him more than anger would have. He took a step closer, then stopped, unsure if the distance between them was physical or something deeper. "I'm sorry," he said, the words falling out in a rush. "I'm sorry for leaving that way. For hurting you. For everything." Evelyn took a breath, then removed her gardening gloves one finger at a time. Her hands were steady. "I read your letter many times," she said. "I know you were afraid. I know you felt trapped." "That's no excuse," he said quickly. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." The honesty in her voice made his chest tighten. He lowered his gaze, feeling the shame settle deeper. "I didn't expect your letter," he said after a moment. "Not the way you wrote it." She nodded. "I wrote what I need." The afternoon light settled softly across the living room. As Evelyn and Thomas sat facing each other for the first time in weeks, they didn't sit on the sofa they used to share. Instead, they chose separate chairs, with a small table between them. It felt less familiar, but more honest. Neither of them tried to pretend this was the same life they had before. The house smelled faintly of lavender from the candle Evelyn had lit that morning. It was a calm scent, one that made the room feel steady, anchored. Thomas sat with his back straight, his hands clasped loosely, trying to find words that didn't collapse under the weight of apology. Evelyn waited, patient but guarded. He spoke first. "I didn't come home today expecting forgiveness," he said quietly. "I came because I couldn't hide from what I became." She looked at him, her expression calm but unreadable. "And what do you think you became?" she asked. "A man who ran," he said. "From fear. From age. From you. From myself." Evelyn nodded once, acknowledging the truth without softening it. She sat back in her chair, her fingers resting lightly on the armrests. "Running doesn't make you unlovable," she said. "But it makes trust difficult." Thomas nodded, swallowing the emotion rising in his throat. "I know. And I don't expect trust all at once. I don't expect things to go back to what they were." Evelyn exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting toward the window. The garden outside glowed in the warm light. The rose bushes she had tended through loneliness and confusion now seemed to stand taller, fuller. "That's good," she said, "because I don't want what we had before." Thomas blinked. "You don't?" "No," she said, turning back to him. "The life we had was built on love, yes, but also on silence. On things we never said. On fears we never named." He lowered his head. "You're right." Evelyn leaned forward slightly. Her voice softened but stayed firm. "I spent years thinking that if I stayed quiet and patient, everything would stay stable. I didn't realize silence can build walls." Thomas looked up. "I didn't realize fear does the same." A pause fell between them, quiet, but no longer heavy. Evelyn continued, "If we move forward, it has to be different. We talk. We name things. We don't run from hard truths." "I can do that," he said. "Or at least I want to learn." She offered a small, steady smile. "Not forgiveness, not yet, but willingness." "Then we can start slowly," she said. "Maybe dinner together once a week. A walk on Saturdays. Counseling if you're willing." Thomas nodded immediately. "Yes. Whatever helps us rebuild." Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. "Rebuilding will take time." "I know," he said. "And I'm not in a hurry. For the first time in a long time I'm not running anywhere." A soft laugh escaped her, brief but warm. "Good." They sat quietly for a moment, watching the shifting patterns of light on the carpet. The silence now was different, gentle, open, a space for something new to grow. Thomas glanced around the room. So many memories lived here, but nothing felt frozen anymore. Everything felt like it had been dusted clean by her courage. He looked at her again. "I meant what I wrote before I left," he said. "That I always admired your strength. I just didn't understand it." "And now?" she asked. "Now I see it," he said. Clearly. Evelyn